Hello, everyone. This is Tad Radzinski. I want to welcome you to our webinar today, Conquering Carbon, How to Reduce Your Company's Carbon Footprint. I'm excited to have everybody on this webinar, and we're looking forward to presenting to you. We have some excellent speakers today that are going to share their experiences with how they're reducing their company's carbon footprint. Before we get started, I just want to do a couple housekeeping things. The plan for this will be we're going to roll through the presentations. There's going to be 4 brief presentations from our speakers, and then we're going to be doing a panel type question session after we finish the presentations. We should have 15 or 20 minutes at least for questions. So I'm going to ask if you have questions to please type them into the question pane, and we will address them when we do get to the point where we're addressing questions. So please, you don't have to wait till the end to put your questions in. If you have questions as we're going through, enter them as you have them. I just want to let everybody know also that this is being recorded, and everybody who signed up and is attending will get a copy of the recording. So you will definitely have the ability to go back to this to reference any kind of information that you learned during this webinar. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. Again, I'm Tad Radzinski. I'm the president of Sustainable Solutions Corporation, and I'm going to be hosting and kicking off this presentation today. I'm excited to have Amy Musanti, Director of Sustainability for Assa Abloy Group. And also we have Molly Polarsky, Sustainability Manager, Region Americas from Sika Corporation. And then Michael Waslin, Associate Director of Environmental Sustainability from Merck. And what's really exciting is all of these speakers are at in different levels in terms of their overall sustainability journey and their mission to reduce carbon in their operations. I'm excited to also say that both Amy and Molly are going to be talking about some of the products that their companies actually manufacture that can help all of you to reduce your carbon footprint in your operations. So with that, I'm going to get started. Again, Tad Radzinski, and I'm just wanted to give a quick background. I spent 12 years working in an electric utility, so I have a lot of knowledge about how we generate electricity. And I started doing sustainability back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We started Sustainable Solutions in 2001. And one of the reasons I did that is having worked in the electricity sector, I just knew all the impacts that come from generating electricity. Not only is there air emissions and carbon and different things like that from the way we produce electricity, which I'm going to talk about more in a few minutes, but there's also a lot of other impacts in terms of how we mine fuels out of the earth like coal and natural gas, and even nuclear has some major impacts that we have to worry about. So I kind of dedicated my life to focusing on sustainability, and we're in a situation right now with the climate crisis that we really all have to be focused. So I usually like to take a life cycle approach when I do any kind of presentations, and we all know that everything has a life cycle. You usually start out with raw materials, and then those get manufactured into something, and then they get transported, and then we install and use them. And then at the end of life, those products or materials get disposed of or recycled or recovered. Just depends on what happens here. So same thing with a building. If we're building out a whole building, we've done some webinars in the past on embodied carbon in products, but it's important that today we're going to be mainly focusing on operational carbon in the building. So over here would be the embodied carbon. This is all the energy that's used to manufacture, say, products. But over here is what we're talking about today, the operational carbon piece in the use of the way we operate our buildings and all kinds of things, because I don't want to just rule out focus on buildings. I mean, some of you that are on here might have fleets of vehicles. That's going to be an important aspect in reducing your carbon footprint and things like that. But when we're talking operational carbon, it's going to be mainly focused on the electricity and the fuels that are used in your buildings. And your buildings could be anything. It could be an office building. It could be a manufacturing building. It could be, a lot of different things. So it doesn't really matter. In fact, if you think about it, every one of us is using energy, whether we live in a home or an apartment or somewhere else. we're consuming electricity every day, and we're also consuming fuels every day, depending on how we heat our hot water or how we heat our homes and that kind of thing. So really important to note that we're going to be talking about how do we reduce the operational carbon that comes from the energy we use to operate our buildings and to do the different things we do in society. I also want to make sure this is clear when we talk today that there are what we call scopes. When we talk about greenhouse gas accounting and greenhouse gases, Scope 1 represents all the fuels that are utilized directly in a building. So if you're burning natural gas or oil to heat your home or to heat your hot water in your building, then that would be captured under the Scope 1 emissions from direct combustion of those fuels. And it can also apply to company vehicles and equipment. So if any of you that are on this webinar are manufacturers, then you probably use maybe propane in your forklifts, or you maybe have company vehicles on site. Those would also contribute to Scope 1. For Scope 2, we'd be looking mainly at purchased electricity as the primary. However, some of you may be purchasing steam or even purchasing district heating and cooling services, depending on where you're located. That represents Scope 2, and that's actually indirect greenhouse gas emissions. And the reason that's indirect is because the electric utility or the steam plant or the folks that are creating that district heating and cooling are burning the fuels or using the energy to actually produce either the electricity or the steam or the chilled water or whatever you're using. The other thing, which we're not going to talk a lot about today, but we'll have another webinar in the future, will be about Scope 3. And that comes mainly from your suppliers, if you're a manufacturer or if you do business air travel, waste disposal, procuring any kind of goods. So that's indirect emissions from sources that a company does not own, but are related to your operations. So we're not going to talk much about that today. Other thing is, like I said, I worked in electric utility for 12 years. I'm a mechanical engineer. Even today, the good thing is there's a lot more renewable energy being used to generate our electricity. However, we're still generating 63% nationally of our electricity from coal and natural gas power plants. And every time we burn fuel, whether it's coal or natural gas, we're emitting greenhouse gases as well as many other things that really make this a very important aspect of thinking about how are we going to reduce our carbon footprint in our building. Number one, we got to start thinking about reducing electricity consumption. Nuclear plants are good because they don't emit any carbon because it's a fission process, so there's no combustion of anything. However, nuclear plants generate some of the most radioactive materials on the planet that are really dangerous, and we have nowhere to store them and we have no way to dispose of them. And then renewables cover everything from wind to photovoltaics, which generate electricity from the sun. It could be solar hot water. It could be hydro plants. It could be plants that burn biomass. So that's what renewables are when we talk about that. And again, this is just general to give you a rough idea of how the electricity is being produced. But I can tell you it is critical that we really focus on reducing electricity consumption in our buildings because most power plants, based on our current system, are only 30% efficient. And what that means is to get, say, 1 kilowatt hour of electricity in your home or your building, it takes 2.8 times the amount of energy to produce that kilowatt hour of electricity in the fuels that were used. And then you have grid losses as the electrons are traveling over the grid to get to the building. So really important that we know that if our source energy, let's say you use 1 million kilowatt hours a year, in reality, you can multiply that by 2.8 times higher for the power plant to generate that if it's a combustion plant, whether it's coal or whatever. I will also say that our electricity mix that comes from the grid is a mix in every utility. It's very rare that you're just going to have one of those types of generation. It's usually a mix of generation. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. So there's different things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint, your Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions specifically. And typically what you want to do is benchmark and baseline and understand your energy consumption and carbon footprint first. And typically what you should do is conduct a sustainable operations assessment to understand where the opportunities are to reduce that energy usage, get into changing behaviors, doing energy conservation measures. Then there's other choices. After you do all that, you can start to purchase green power. or you can consider installing on-site renewables or different things like that. I have a nice infographic I'm going to show in a minute. And one thing that I know is that a lot of people think they're going to buy their way out of this by reducing their carbon footprint by just buying offsets. I definitely recommend that as a very last resort. You should do all the steps first to minimize consumption of energy before you even think about buying offsets or even buying off-site renewable energy credits and things like that. Because there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. I've worked in hundreds of manufacturing facilities and other buildings, and there's always opportunities to reduce energy. So that slide I just showed, here's a nice graphic that shows this. And one thing to think about is many of you on this webinar might have set emission reduction goals in the future. So you have your baseline for today, but where are you going to be in the future as your company grows? So these are the steps you want to do first. Let's do operational behavior change. Let's talk about building and equipment upgrades, energy conservation measures. See if you can buy green power from your electric utility. Looking at electrification of thermal solutions. So if you're burning natural gas, is there a way you can go to electrification of that in lieu of burning the natural gas? Because there's not too many choices when it comes to renewable natural gas. On-site solar, off-site renewables, and then RECs. So this is an example of what these things look like. On-site means you own you basically own the photovoltaics in this picture, and you receive all the RECs, so you can make the claim that you have reduced your energy consumption. You can do a power purchase agreement where someone else installs the solar or the other renewables on your building or on your site. And then ideally, you better own the RECs, because if you don't own the RECs, then you can't claim that you've reduced your carbon footprint. Someone else purchases that. REC stands for Renewable Energy Credits. VPPA means that it's a virtual power purchase agreement where you actually invested in an offsite renewable system, and you own the RECs, and you receive money from that. We'll hear some discussion about that today. And then green power is just buying either renewable energy or something right from your utility. And then renewable natural gas, believe it or not, we do actually generate methane through anaerobic digestion, landfills, or other things like that. So that's another hot topic right now. I just wanted to do a quick thing. I mentioned grid mix, and this is a calculation that we did to look at what was scope 1 and scope 2 emissions from a facility. And you can see here we had so many metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent or CO2 equivalent. The facility was located in this grid region, RFCE East. However, if some companies run their analysis against the USA average E-grid, and when you do that, and if we were to put a price on carbon of $30 a metric ton, you can see here for the greenhouse gas emissions, we'd be looking at roughly $18,000, in cost versus $21,000 if you use the wrong grid mix. So it's really important that when you do your carbon accounting, you're understanding where to look. Real quick, there's a lot of benefits to operational carbon. I just talked about a potential carbon tax. I guarantee 100% that if you do this right, you're going to save money in your operations. By saving electricity, saving fuels, you're going to save money. You're also indirectly reducing impacts to people because you're not, using electricity that's contributing to health effects from people in terms of the emissions that come out. And then it also demonstrates your commitment to sustainability. Also, if you're a publicly traded company, just about every analyst and investor is going to be looking for you to have some kind of greenhouse gas reduction strategy going forward if they're going to invest in you. We have a whole program, we call it Conquering Carbon, and it starts out with all those things I just talked about. We have our sister company, Green Circle Certified, that looks at that and certifies this. And these are just some of the ways that Green Circle looks at certifying reduced carbon emissions. It could be, companies can claim carbon neutral. They could talk about carbon emission reductions in their operations. They could be identifying renewable energy usage and things like that. But these are all important attributes, whether you're doing it as a certified environmental fact or a certified sustainability fact. So with that, I just wanted to set the stage. I know I threw out a lot of information, and now I'm going to turn it over to Amy Musanti and have her speak. She's with Assa Abloy.
Sounds good. Thanks a million, Todd. That's a perfect introduction to jump right in. So we'll start on the next slide. I'm Amy Musanti. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Assa Abloy, based in New Haven, Connecticut, responsible for working with our team around the entire country, though. I have over 14 years experience in the building materials industry, and what many people are surprised to find out about me is that my educational background is not sustainability. I always like to point that out because I think sometimes we have younger professionals on our call, and it's really interesting to see how a career can morph alongside the progress of an industry and an organization as sustainability becomes more and more at the forefront of the building materials world. So on the next slide, I'll show you just a little bit about Assa Abloy. And for those of you that are not familiar with our organization, we are all over the world. Our headquarters is based in Stockholm. And basically the way to think about the products and solutions that we offer is everything from curb to core in a building. So around safety, security, and of course my favorite attribute, which is sustainability. But on the screen there, you'll see some examples of the types of products and solutions that we offer for commercial and institutional buildings. So now that we've got that out of the way, I do want to acknowledge on the next slide, yep, perfect, thanks Ted, that we do have a variety of attendees today. And first of all, thank you all very much for taking time to join us. But you all come from different markets and different job functions. So that being said, operational carbon may mean something different to each of you. Some may be looking for help with the footprint of the building that you manage. Others may be looking for products that help with the footprint of the building that you're specifying products for. And as Tad mentioned, the main focus is the electricity and the fuels. So that's what I'll be touching on briefly today, and a little bit more about what we do as a manufacturer. It's important to note that sustainable product innovation is, not just about the product itself, but how it performs. We do consider the product's entire life cycle. And so you'll see some examples there of how, not only do we focus on extraction of raw materials, but there's also a very heavy focus on responsible manufacturing, understanding how to reduce waste. And then there is that keyword, lowering our carbon footprint. Next slide. And for us, that core is around innovation, and that comes from product leadership. And what we found a lot of times, especially with sustainability and working with such progressive customers around the country, in the world, is that they're looking to collaborate with manufacturers that have similar goals in mind. So anytime we as a manufacturer are developing new products, we utilize what we refer to as a sustainability compass, which is that circular little icon on the right-hand side of your screen there. And this compass helps our product development teams to focus on 8 key areas around raw materials, recyclability, end-of-life reusability, in-life energy consumption, financial cost, and then of course, as we're talking about today, carbon footprint. So not only does this help to minimize the footprint of a product in its use phase once it's installed, which we're talking about today, it also helps to create awareness and offer the ability to easily compare sustainability implications for different designs of a product that we're bringing to market. And this is incredibly relevant with the types of demands that we're seeing in building materials. So next slide. And this is a great example, and something that comes up a lot is it's not just one product, it's an assembly of many systems. And it's not just one person in a building or on a project team trying to put all these pieces of the puzzles together. It's all companies, all organizations and institutions are now more than ever tasked with having to do more with less. And that could be less budget, that could be less resources. So many people within a building team are looking to make reductions in purchasing, maybe around the amount of materials for a building. But it's also important to think about operations in that footprint. And it does require us to get very creative and think differently about every element in a building. And I think, it's helpful for us all on the call here today, because in many cases, when we think of operational carbon, we look to a facilities or operations team. But this information that we're talking about today is relevant for anyone involved in the building project process. So on the next slide, I'll give you some examples of what this means from the perspective of doors, hardware, accessories, and access control, and what that means for the footprint of the building. So a lot of times, if we're not geeking out on doors and hardware like I am, you can take some of these products and solutions for granted because we just walk in and out of a building without thinking about it. But I always guarantee that after conversations like we have today, you'll never look at a doorway the same again. So a great example is with what we're showing here, EAC, which is electronic access control. Any of you that have had a security card that you swipe to gain access, that's what we're talking about here. So by utilizing existing infrastructure in a building like power over Ethernet or Wi-Fi, we have the capability to power products needed for security and access control. And this results in reduction of power being pulled from the grid. It also results in less components around the door overall, and that goes back to that focus on that entire life cycle of the product. Next slide. And then we think this might be, a small impact, but when we think of the amount of door openings in a building, in an institution, like a university campus or a healthcare facility, all of that energy usage at the opening starts to add up. And that's why it's important to take these types of energy draws into consideration when we're thinking about the overall operational footprint of a building. And so on the next slide, I'll give you an example of that. So those of you that aren't familiar, that's in the center, a picture of an electrified mortise lock, which is generally the type of lock we come into contact with when we're in a commercial or institutional building. And what's interesting here is that this type of product basically operates like a hybrid vehicle. It has to be electrified for security purposes, but it doesn't need to be powered on all the time. So much like a hybrid car at a stoplight, it will use energy until it's fully charged and then drop down into a low energy standby mode until someone needs to access the opening, or in the case of the vehicle, until the light turns green. And that results in about a 96% more energy efficient product, as certified by a company called Green Circle Certified. I don't know if you've heard of them before, right, Tad? And this is the type of product and the type of technology that helps building owners and facilities teams realize actual savings across the board, even in these components that we wouldn't necessarily think about in an overall building structure. And so that's what keeps things really interesting for us in the world of doors and hardware. And on the next slide, I'll give you just one other example of a product. So, we think about blue sky thinking and different types of innovation, like I had mentioned before. And we see products and solutions with large footprints like HVAC and lighting that have the opportunity to bring the reduction level to almost nothing. And we're able to do that too with some of the products that we offer. So in this case, this is a door operator that is completely regenerative at this point, which means that the power that it uses to operate the door actually comes from power that's been generated by people opening and closing it. So these are the types of solutions that I encourage you to look for when you're working on a more progressive building and one that needs to have a smaller footprint. And so on the last slide here, just to wrap up, I'll leave you with what our commitment to a sustainable future looks like from Assa Abloy. We've recently committed to science-based targets to further substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions across our entire value chain. And again, it's important to think about this perspective because the talk of operational carbon for what it looks like for our customers ties back to how responsible we are and how we can meet those demands during our throughout our value chain. So we've set some really robust targets. We know that these align with many of the customers that we work with on a regular basis. And these types of programs really just build momentum and progress from previous programs that we've worked on in the past. And you'll see initiatives like this coming from a lot of industry-leading manufacturers across the board, especially within the building materials world. And so, bottom line, I'll say as a wrap up is we love to participate in webinars like this to share what's possible and to inspire all involved in the building materials industry, and with the hopes that you'll continue to push the envelope in a collective manner. So take that away with you as a good example of understanding what's possible, be it a large or small manufacturer or anyone on an A&D firm, contractor side as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. That was excellent and good information. We'll definitely talk about some of the things you said during the question session. And with that, now I'm going to turn it over to Molly Polarsky, Sustainability Manager at Sika Corporation. So Molly, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Tad. Hi, everybody. You can go on to the next slide, please. So I'm Molly Polarsky. As Tad said, my role at Sika is Sustainability Manager for Region Americas. I'm happy to talk to you today about what Sika is doing to conquer its carbon. So within Region Americas, my role, it covers Canada, US, and Latin America. I've been in this role for about 1.5 years now, and prior to it, I came on from one of Sika's acquisitions, actually, back in 2017. I have my master's in environmental policy from Sciences Po Paris, and I'm just generally known by my colleagues and my friends as a sustainability enthusiast. So maybe you'll relate to Sika's journey if your company is also still in the earlier stages of defining and rolling out your carbon strategy. Next slide. So today I will walk you through a brief introduction of Sika, followed by a short overview of what our carbon targets are. And then I will walk you through some of the main projects that we've been implementing across the region, share some key lessons that we've learned since running this focused sustainability program. And lastly, I'll touch on a few ways that Sika can help reach your carbon targets, and then conclude with our vision for the future. Next. So Sika is a specialty chemicals company. We manufacture systems and products all throughout the building and motor vehicle industries. We have global headquarters out of Switzerland, and our US headquarters are out of New Jersey. And we have a global presence with over 300 plants worldwide. So while you may not already be familiar with Sika, our products really are all around you. Maybe from your car to your office building, definitely in your local Target stores, as you'll see later. So because of this expansive presence, we really recognize the positive influence that Sika can have in really this race towards slowing down climate change. That's why Sika is committed not only to reducing its own CO2 emissions, but also to helping our customers reduce theirs as well. Next slide, please. Here, I wanted to quickly go over Sika's core target markets. So within each target market are a variety of products and solutions that combine both high performance with reduced environmental impact. Our concrete admixtures, for example, reduce energy and water consumption, and they're also available from bio-based raw materials. Our green roofs, our cool roofs, solar roofs meet demand for eco-friendly and energy-saving designs. Our sealing and bonding products ensure an airtight, energy-efficient building envelope. And then our industry products are vital in many renewable sectors, such as wind. Next slide. So at Ceca, sustainability is handled across global, regional, and local levels. I'm here representing Region Americas, one of Ceca's 4 regions across the globe. Regional sustainability managers oversee the development of local strategies and the implementation of various initiatives. So the discussion today will really be geared more towards targeting operational carbon, mainly within North and South America. Next slide, please. So more value, less impact is Ceca's global sustainability strategy, which features 6 strategic targets overall, illustrated here on the left side of the screen. But really 2 of these pillars are aimed at tackling our carbon footprint, energy and climate performance. So of course, when you're reducing energy consumption and maximizing your share of renewables for our energy target, that will also support our climate target as well, which is to reduce CO2 emissions per ton sold by 12% until 2023. Currently, we're still in the first phase of targeting carbon, primarily through those scope 1 and 2 emissions that Tad had mentioned, meaning we're targeting energy that we burn and electricity that we purchase within our operations. So 2020 was our first year of really tackling our carbon emissions, and we've already surpassed our 2023 target by 14%. However, despite this success, we know that there's still a lot of work ahead, especially now that scope 3 emissions are on the horizon, and now that we're fully committed to achieving our long-term goal, which is to be net zero by 2050. Next, please. So now I wanted to take a closer look into the projects across the region. First, we have several identified initiatives that impact operations globally. Really, whether these are opportunities unique to a specific technology or maybe they're standard across all of our sites, they have the potential for some huge CO2 emission savings and have proven to be a great starting point thanks to corporate support and the best demonstrated practices that are already available. Our regional and local initiatives vary based on specific needs within that site or country. So whether these are identified as regional opportunities first and then rolled out systematically, or maybe they're local isolated wins that are led by individual sites, we're constantly seeking ways to expand our impact by scaling up. What we found when working to identify these opportunities is that the more data we have access to, the better off we are. And so that's why a parallel focus has really been taking the time to map out and measure the details of our consumption. And then part of our strategic target I mentioned on energy includes maximizing our share of renewable electricity also by 2023. So while there are various ways to reach this target, we have found that solar power is a reliable and optimal focus for consuming clean energy. That's why we are running various solar initiatives and pilots across the region. Pictured here actually are solar panels that were just installed last week on one of our largest production factories in Mexico. And then the last category represents our overall renewable strategy, which spans across both short and long-term solutions for both generating and procuring renewable electricity. Within the region, we're evaluating all of our options from unbundled RECs to VPPAs, and we're building our portfolio in order to support the current and the future renewable energy market. Next slide, please. So despite being in the earlier stages of our CO2 journey, we've still learned a whole lot in this last year and a half. So really first, in terms of target setting, it's important to be ambitious, but also realistic. And then without support from your top management, I will say it will be challenging to really prioritize sustainability along with all of those other company needs. And then, as a next point, I guess let's face it, we all have a lot going on. We're all busy. So maybe it would make sense to incentivize your team in prioritizing sustainability, maybe through prizes or competitions or some form of recognition. Next, I wanted to mention taking the time to improve your data collection and reporting processes, because the high quality data that comes out of it is truly worth it. Sustainability professionals can't do it alone. So collaborating and building dedicated teams across various departments can be vital in terms of getting a team who's interested and passionate on this topic, even though that might not be their primary role. Lastly, filling the pipeline with as many viable opportunities from the beginning in order to minimize the impact as delays, which I will say are inevitable, kick in. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to switch gears and quickly discuss various Sika solutions that can help you reduce your own carbon emissions, both operational and embodied. First are Sika Cool Roofs, which are light color roofs that provide net annual energy savings through reflecting more sunlight and thus minimizing the amount of heat entering a building. Cool roofs also mitigate urban heat island effect, which is what leads to warmer temperatures in urban areas. A fun fact, Target is among Sika's customers that uses cool roofs in all of their buildings. Target also participates in Sika's roof membrane recycling program. And this program is one in which Sika recycles pre- and post-consumer PVC roofing membranes. And it's been running successfully for over 15 years. Overall, we've saved over 40,000 tons of raw materials and reduced CO2 by 10%. Another possibility for saving on both your embodied and operational carbon is by ensuring an airtight, well-insulated building envelope. So the EcoMax CI wall solution minimizes energy loss while also eliminating the need for other traditional building materials, thus saving resources in the process. Lastly, Sika is excited to roll out its recent innovation for concrete recycling. We've developed a solution to fully separate the aggregates from used concrete, which can then be reused to produce new, high-quality concrete. Within this recycling process, 50 kilograms of CO2 are bound up in 1 ton of old concrete that's treated, making embodied carbon reductions that much more attainable. Next slide. So as a conclusion, I wanted to touch on where Sika's concentration will fall over the next years. Conserving energy and shifting to renewable sources requires continued focus and dedication, so much that sustainability must truly be ingrained into the very core of our business. Through these ongoing efforts to reduce CO2 emissions, Sika will undoubtedly continue to reach its targets and ultimately ensure that net zero is in our near future. And then what remains will simply be a question of how fast we can continue down this path towards conquering carbon. So thank you all for listening, and Tad, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Molly. That was excellent. I'm looking forward to discussing this a little more in our session where we can answer some questions and different things like that, but really exciting work you're doing there. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Waslin, Associate Director of Environmental Sustainability at Merck. So, Michael, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Tad. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Molly. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Michael Waslin, part of Merck Pharmaceuticals. have been in the pharmaceutical space for the last 24 years, and the last 8 years has been, I've had a sustainability title after my name. Next slide, please. Oh, keep going. So today, just going to introduce quickly who we are as a company. We're a little bit different area than the previous two presenters, right? We're actually a manufacturer, a pharmaceutical manufacturer. We're actually utilizing the products of some of the companies like Assa Abloy and Sika. So we're going to talk a little bit about our journey around sustainability. Also keying in on the value of energy and why that was important, and why we were defining the value of energy was important to us on our journey. And also want to talk about some exciting things that are coming up next for our company. Next slide. So who are we? So we are Merck, known as Merck in North America. Outside of North America, we're known as MSD. So depending on where you sit, you might hear different references. We're a large pharmaceutical company. We have a human health side. So if you've heard of Keytruda and some other products around infectious diseases, such as working on HIV and Ebola, that would be us. We also have a active animal health side as well. And one of the products that you may have heard of animal health is Bravecto. So next slide, please. So just going to start here. So we've had a long-standing relationship with sustainability, right? And just dating back to like 2004. We're a large company, a large decentralized company. We've got 70 to 80 plant sites, depending on what you consider a plant site. You know, millions of square feet of office space. But we've recognized the importance of connection to the environment for a long time, right? I think I said that back in 2004 was when we first kind of set our first energy goal for the company. And we kind of went along, as this decentralized organization, and we recognized the importance of sustainability. And we just, like many others in the, like, say 2000 or 2011 timeframe, we had a bunch of goals that we were trying to act on. I think there's like 17 goals. Well, the problem was some of those goals were they were in conflict with each other, or we're a highly regulated company, and we couldn't actually achieve without like opening licenses for products, that are human and animal life-saving products. So it was kind of difficult to do that. So in that 2011, 2013 timeframe, our company realized the need for a sustainability team. And that's about the time where our Sustainability Center of Excellence was formed. And we were charged with setting the strategy for the company of sustainability. Mind you, at the time, it was more of a parallel strategy as opposed to an embedded strategy, as well as taking these 17 goals and aligning them with the business and really trying to boil them down to just a couple that would make sense for the business. And this was very common at this time. Next slide, please. So we did a lot of work. We came up with, what is important to the business. And like many other companies at the time, we came up with a water, a climate, and a waste goal. Problem is, we didn't really have a lot of trust at that moment. Remember, I said we were sort of a parallel effort in the way of our strategy. We didn't have a lot of trust from senior leadership. We weren't able to really get out to our plant sites to say, what really is going on here? What can happen? We had to use and rely on a lot of our own experiences and our own networking for when our group of three, we were three for 70,000 people, three sustainability experts, like what was our network? What were we hearing? So we really got pushed to set goals that we knew we could meet. And, we could see that kind of writing on the wall, but that was what our company was, very conservative company, was comfortable with at the time. Well, lo and behold, not just, a couple years into this goal setting process in the 2013, 2014 timeframe, we saw that we were going to meet these 2020 goals by 2015. So we had to start planning differently. Next slide, please. So the good news was the world was changing rapidly at that point. And we were also having some successes, right? So the conversation started to change. We started to try to build trust with senior leaders. We started to get out to our plant sites. We started to do a lot of benchmarking with our peers, with companies similar to in philosophy to us, as well as started looking at like macro trends that were happening. So this is again in this like 2015-16 timeframe, things started to change drastically, right? It started to become apparent that, you know, healthcare needed to get green, right? It wasn't just what you were doing, but how you're doing it became really important. You know, there was a huge push on climate action. The energy markets changed at this time. It went from renewable energy was this alternative form of energy to no, it's really just another type of energy that's viable, and the contracting structure around renewable energy changed. You know, businesses and even the people that we started to deal with internally started to think about life cycle analysis. Like Tad kind of covered that earlier. You know, where does the material that we're using come from, and what happens to it after we use it in our own operations? Another big thing that was going on was the rise of environmental and social and governance investing, and the connection that investors started to make, that saying like companies that perform well here are good investments, right, over the long term. And this is only even becoming more and more rapid every day. We're hearing more and more ESG investing stories. There was also there's a competition for talent, right? The workforce was changing. What was important to the workforce was changing, right? So we knew that if we had a good ESG story, that we would attract and retain our top tier talent. And then finally, you know, again, those things within our own operations, you know, how do we impact deforestation? How do we impact water? What about the resource depletion comes from all the stuff that we make? Next slide, please. So we were able to, you know, come up with a new strategy, sustainability strategy for our company. And we also recognize that we need to stop it from being a parallel effort when we need to embed it into the corporate strategy. So we took a three-pronged approach: efficient operations, right? That's where a lot of the goals come from, right? You know, making sure that our scope 1 and 2 emissions are being reduced, making sure our water is being reduced, making sure that we're not using more material than we need. But also, you know, thinking about how are we designing our processes, right? So now we need to get to the capital projects groups. We need to start to talk to them. And then finally, and not that we're not going to cover it too much on this call, but, you know, thinking about our value chain, right? Thinking about, hey, we have risks. What do we have this shared impact in our value chain with our suppliers, with our customers. Like, what do we need to do about that? Next slide, please. So building off of our successes, building off of the fact that, you know, we rapidly met those goals early, doing all that benchmarking, we decided to go after more aspirational goals. And it was really at this time frame too, something key happened. And rather than it just being the sustainability center of excellence, you know, pushing this message, we got together with other groups, like-minded groups, who were probably taking this message up to their leadership the same way. They were taking this message up to their leadership as well, but they were using different language and they had different things that were important to them. So we actually got together with our energy group, we got together with our procurement organization, and eventually our sites and our finance organization. And we decided to define energy and what energy means to our company in a different way. And we spoke about it differently. Rather than the sustainability guy always going and saying, hey, this is a way to reduce carbon or carbon emissions. Like, I would go into meetings with my procurement person and I would talk about what the importance of sustainability or energy, the value of energy from a procurement standpoint was. the finance guy would talk about the environmental piece, right? The procurement guy would talk about the engineering solutions for supply and demand, right? So we all started to finish each other's sentences. It's actually really rare that I'm presenting by myself and not having 2 or 3 other people from this extended team and changing the way that we worked. And it was changing the concept of energy and the value proposition around energy that allowed us to get a foothold with senior leaders and go and reach out for these aspirational goals. So I'm not going to go into all the goals, but just want to focus on energy, right? We're reducing 40% of our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2025. We're also, set a aspirational renewable energy goal of 100% of our renewable electric will be, or of our purchased electric will be renewable by 2040. And I'll put a big asterisk on that because my last slide will say how things have changed even since 2018. So next slide, please. So you've heard some of the earlier presenters and Tad talk about just how do you go about changing that and reducing that operational carbon. So the way that you do it is first you measure, right? You look for continuous improvement. You have to always monitor. You need to build up your network of people. You need to make sure that we're technically strong and that you've created an organization to enable these types of energy savings, right? And you have to look for energy savings first before you jump to the top of this pyramid, like this resource pyramid, and start to get into renewable energy. So we focused on the bottom of the pyramid first, and we continue to focus on the bottom of the pyramid. And then we start moving into looking for making sure that our operations are reliable, making sure that we're, what can we do to reduce the demand? And then finally, looking, through our capital projects groups and how do we tweak the design that is going on out there. And then after you do all those, then you start to look for opportunities around renewables. And what you find is senior leadership becomes very amenable to that because you've proven yourself, right? And they know that you've reduced your emissions as much as possible. And now you can start to look to be creative around renewable energy. And you need to be open to new things around renewable energy. So next slide, please. So it was that success that led us to be able to be one of the, I would say, more early adopters of the virtual power purchase agreement. So a couple years ago, we signed a large 60 megawatt virtual power purchase agreement to bring additionality of new renewable energy source to the Texas ERCOT market. And then we get the benefit of the energy attributes or the renewable energy credits from that.
Sounds like we lost Michael. And are we hearing him? Okay. I think we had an issue here with Michael's internet or something. So let me just move ahead and see if we can get him back on. And I know that Merck has made some major commitments to, looking at carbon neutrality in operations by 2025. And I believe that Michael was going to talk about the addition of additional VPPA activity. So with that, let's continue on here. And just a couple quick slides here on some resources that are available if you want to learn more about some of the topics we talked about. We also have a podcast about this. Now let's take the last few minutes here and get to our questions because we have quite a number of questions. And one thing that I can ask is, I'm seeing people rolling in here asking about, what did it take, to get management on board with some of these different targets and whatnot. And I'm going to start out with Amy to, talk about, did you have, your management team fully behind this, especially when you made the commitment for science-based targets, and how did that evolve? And then we'll switch over to Molly to answer the question as well.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks, Tad. Yes, that's a great question. And so that directive came from our group center in Stockholm. Our global sustainability director, Charles Robinson, headed that up. And, you know, it was interesting because we wound up building the case for quite some time, over a year, to bring to senior leadership this idea that science-based targets were incredibly relevant, and it was finally accepted. And then it was like, oh gosh, okay, now what do we do? So there's a lot, I would say, a lot of time spent on the front end for the adoption and acceptance of science-based targets. And then once it is accepted, I would say the best recommendation, and where we're finding a lot of great value, is to reach out to similar manufacturers, whether it be the type of footprint that they have globally, or the type of culture that they have, or the types of goals. Reach out to your peers at those organizations and get some feedback from them as to what their next steps were. And that's kind of the place that we're in right now, and where we're finding the greatest help to kind of give us that next step, that push for the next step.
Okay, great. Molly, how about you? How did you, your management?
So it was kind of a combination. As I mentioned, we've been kind of running with sustainability as a focus over the last year and a half. That's not to say we didn't still have our more value, less impact sustainability strategy before that. We did. However, as I was pushing for a transition into sustainability I was on the marketing team before, it happened towards the end of 2019, at the same time as group management did kind of a makeover of our more value, less impact targets, where they implemented the climate performance targets. So for me, I mean, myself professionally and the company, it worked out just kind of, I think, timing wise, that I was able to help gear the company towards dedicating resources in terms of a full-time dedicated position to sustainability, at the same time as we had this new focus from our group management on CO2 specifically and renewable electricity. So once that was in place, it kind of clicked, but that doesn't mean that now, that decision took place from group management in our headquarters in Switzerland. And so in terms of rolling it out, that doesn't happen overnight. And so I'd say it's still a work in progress to bring everyone on board, managers on board. And what I've found is it really helps to show all of the benefits to sustainability. Tad, you mentioned, in a lot of these cases, you're also saving money. Saving on what you're paying for electricity or fuels. And so that does help also in terms of prioritizing sustainability with some of the other needs of the company.
Yeah, great. And Michael, I think you made it back. Thank you, Molly. That's great feedback. Michael, are you back on?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you now. Sorry we lost you and we went to questions.
No, that's okay.
You didn't get to finish your discussion about your VPPA, but I was just kind of asking, the audience wanted to understand about management commitment and that kind of thing in terms of, setting these carbon reduction goals like you.
Sure. So that my last slide actually was just about that, and just, over the last year, it's gone from that. Remember, I mentioned that we didn't have trust in the beginning, but then, we showed our successes. We started talking about it differently, changed the way that we were working, and now management has really started to push us to say, what can we do? What should be the next thing that we're doing, because they see the value in this. And actually, we, just very recently announced our carbon neutral goal, right? Our carbon neutral commitment. We've now have 3 more virtual power purchase agreements that will begin spinning or generating electric in the next two years. We're have a major commitment in our supply chain as well. So it's really exciting, but it doesn't happen overnight. And now we're trying to reach out to our our different plant sites across the world and really make it happen, right?
Yeah, excellent. So unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. There are a number of questions we didn't get to answer. We will respond to those questions and get back to the folks that asked them, and I'll share them with our presenters so they can actually provide the responses. Just wanted to thank everybody for joining today. Thank you all, my panelists. It was excellent, and we're excited about the different things that you talked about. There's so much to cover here, and we always run out of time because there's just so much. So maybe we'll talk about doing a future one. And again, there are these resources out there that are available, and we will be sharing this webinar to people, so you can basically have the recording of it. So thank you all, and we're going to end the presentation now.